Well, good morning, Patriots. Welcome to the 292nd consecutive Friday meeting of the East Valley Red Friday Patriots. There are 115 of you present today. Where the hell did you come from? You know, I can only surmise that you folks survived the Christmas and New Year festivities, but as I've been walking around, looking around this room, I confirm that there are a few of you that ain't quite recuperated yet. In fact, I think a few of you are still in extended play mode. Good for you. Hope we could all keep up that pace. You know, speaking of the season's holidays, last year, shortly after the New Year celebration, my wife Hank and I were having dinner with several of my retired kinfolks down in East Texas over in the backwoods of Tenaha. They all live in close proximity. So it was good to have all of us together. And one evening while we were eating dinner, they were all complaining that they didn't get to see their grandkids during the Christmas time. And even worse is that they had mailed out gifts, didn't even get a thank you, not even an acknowledgement or even a kiss my rear. Really sad. One of my kin, Julia, had been rather silent throughout all the complaining. And I noticed she just listened and smiled. Finally, Julia spoke up and said, "Well, I heard from every one of my grandkids. And not only did I get a thank you, but I got a special visit from each and every one of them." Julia said, "I made the decision to send my grandkids money." I said, "Hey, Hank and I sent money too, but we had no response from our grandkids, not a card, not an email, not a phone call, not a text, nothing." Well, my other kinfolks kind of stared at Julia in amazement. They said, "Julia, you must have some very thoughtful and amazing grandkids. Good for you." Julia said, "Yes, I do. They're all great kids. In fact, they were so grateful to get the money I sent that each of them came by and said, 'Thank you.' And that's when I signed the checks." Now, that's good old East Texas common sense. And I think my family all agrees that Julia is the bestest grandma ever. Join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We also have a number of the Heineman family and friends that are here to celebrate Chuck Heineman's 82nd birthday. Chuck, raise your hand back there. Son Mark Heineman and friend Tracy Barnes from North Carolina, raise your hands. Son Steve Heineman and wife Jen from northern Minnesota. Daughter Amber Heineman and a family friend Deanna Faye from Seattle, Washington. Chuck's brother, orthodontist Dr. Mark Heineman and friend Sharon Bidwell from Bainbridge Island, Washington. Chuck's brother, Greg Heineman, and wife, Kathy, from Sun Lakes, Arizona. Inez's cousin, first cousin removed, Jeff Crandall. Jeff Crandall, Goodyear, Arizona. I love that cab hat you got on there, bro. Family friend Richard Martinez from Goodyear. Renee Roberts, a family friend and neighbor to Chuck and Inez here in Mesa. And also guest Paul Evanson and Linda Novotny of Las Palmas in Mesa. Can I have a hoo-ah for all these guests? Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. You know, from what I observed, I think most of you were able to partake in the donuts that were available this morning. And in case you're not aware, on the first Friday of each month, we acknowledge our Red Friday members who celebrate birthdays within the month. Believe me, we're grateful for those members who volunteer to provide those sweet treats. And this month, I want to recognize Terry Rapp and Don Stevens for bringing in those treats. Can I have a hoo-ah for Terry and Don? Thank you. You know, as much as I try, I don't think that I've ever acknowledged birthdays without omitting somebody. I'm going to try without omitting someone. So it always seems to kind of sneak up on me and bite me in the rear. So if I miss a name or two, please forgive me. My records have the following Red members celebrating birthdays this month: Jim Fagerlin, Larry May, Hank Nations, Doug Whitaker, Bob Williams, Marcy Flanagan, Janice Mull, Keith Sattler, Howard Marble, Jim Dye, Jeannie Campanoli, Jesse Brewer, Karen Franz, Terrell Lund, Rick Adair, Judy Overmeyer, Ron Ursery, Bob Courtney, Sandy Mayfield, John Mogenson, Martha Ort, Chris Cushman, Chuck Byers, Judy Overmeyer, Ron Ursery, and Chuck Heineman. Did I omit anybody? Come on. Let's have a hoo-ah for these birthday celebrants. You know, we've introduced the Heineman family and friends, and I want to recognize one particular family member in particular that I've noticed many of you have been eyeing. Mark Heineman is the son of Inez and Chuck. Mark, will you stand, please? Thank you. Now, you can't help but note that Mark is wearing the Distinguished United States Marine Corps ceremonial kilt this morning, commonly referred to as the leatherneck tartan. The kilt is truly a beautiful garment, and I want to share with you a little history about the Marine Corps kilt. The word kilt comes from the Scottish verb kilt. The word kilt comes from the Scottish verb kilt. Am I on? So the word kilt comes from the Scottish word kilt, meaning to tuck up the clothes around the body. And that men's skirt, at least the version worn by Mark, dates to the 18th century when it was quite prolific among fierce warriors known as Highlanders. It was a battle skirt and a symbol of honor for the wearer's clan. Today, the United States Marine Corps ceremonial kilt is a garment that symbolizes the Corps' history, its traditions, and its relationship with Scotland. The kilt is often referred to as a tartan, which is a woolen cloth woven in one of several patterns of plaid, especially of a design that is associated with a particular Scottish clan. A tartan pattern is referred to as a set, and the colors chosen for Mark's kilt symbolize the history of the United States Marine Corps. The United States Marine Corps kilt features a unique tartan pattern that alternates between green and blue blocks, and the pattern includes red and yellow lines that form squares. The colors and design of the tartan represents the Marines' honor, valor, legacy, commitment, courage, and patriotism. Additionally, you will note that the kilt pin is worn on the tartan. This is a claymore-shaped pin with the Marine Corps emblem that is worn at the bottom corner of the kilt apron. The pin helps keep the front of the kilt from opening. It is generally positioned around 2 inches from the bottom of the kilt and around 1.5 inches from the apron. You will also notice the sporran, which is a small black leather pouch and chain strap with an integrated United States Marine Corps emblem. That is worn around the waist, positioned in front of the kilt, and the sporran functions as a pocket for the kilt. You'll also notice the kilt hose, socks if you will, and the ancient red and ancient blue flashes. The hose comes just below the knee, and they're folded down at the top. The kilt flashes serve as both a practical and a decorative ornament, and the colors might reference a particular clan. The flashes are 2 pieces of fabric with a small V that is cut out of the bottom and attached to a piece of elastic commonly referred to as garters, and they're extremely practical, holding the socks up on the leg, however wild the shindig might be. Finally, you'll notice the skin do tucked into the top of the kilt hose with only the hilt visible. This is a small single-edged knife or dagger that's traditionally worn with a kilt on the dominant leg as part of the Scottish Highland dress. The name transmits from Gaelic to black or hidden dagger. This is because Highlanders always carried a knife that could not be seen as an extra weapon. Now, during their heyday, kilts were seen as extremely versatile military garments. Despite the contemporary view that skirts are feminine, some of the most fearsome warriors in Scottish history wore them throughout World War I and up until the beginning of Scotland's entry into World War II in 1939. It was at that time that kilts were phased out with the adoption of official uniforms early into World War II. In fact, the kilt is more than just a covering. It allowed those who wore it to move much more freely, especially in the Highlands of Scotland, where the weather can be quite damp. With its tight weave of strong wool, it created a barrier between the rain and the skin. When the armies of the past were fighting in Scotland, the kilt with its pleat helped protect the soldier, much like armor would today. The kilt was intended to distinguish Scots from Britons in the army, but it also proved to be incredibly practical. When the nights became cold, this garment was easily removed and spread out to create a blanket to keep the soldier warm. Many of you United States soldiers might draw a parallel to the popular poncho liner lovingly dubbed the Whoopie. Now, anyone from anywhere in the world can register a new tartan, and they can register that tartan with the Scottish Register of Tartans, whether it's an individual, a school, or a corporate group, as well as professional designers and weavers, providing that the tartan meets their criteria for registration. Each branch of service in the United States military is registered, and each branch has a distinguished tartan pattern, or set, if you will, as you see in this graphic. But I must admit, the Marine Corps pattern and colors absolutely stand out and are quite distinguished. You know, it seems that every time the topic of the kilt comes up, the age-old question follows, do they wear anything under the garment? I do know that some people will go to virtually any end to find the answer to that question. In fact, Mark sent me a photo that proves this to be true. Now, I don't know about you. But I think you can carry some things a little bit too far, as is the case with this gal. Mark, did this lady solve that age-old question? So, Mark, will you please come forward? So, Mark, I have been thinking very seriously about what we might be able to provide you for being able to demonstrate this absolutely gorgeous kilt today. And knowing that there are those that still want to know exactly what's under there, I thought perchance that that's a pretty damn good match, wouldn't you agree? Thank you. Appreciate it. Can I have a Marine hoorah for Mark? Thank you. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce several of the Heinemann family members who've honorably served our country. Jeff Crandall, Chief Warrant Officer 3, United States Army, retired. Will you raise your hand, Jeff? Jeff had active duty military service 21 years, February of 1990 to November of 2011. His duty stations included Fort Polk, Louisiana, Fort Sam Houston, Texas, the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, Fort Hood, Texas, Wiesbaden, Germany, Fort Rucker, Alabama, Fort Lewis, Washington. Jeff had deployments to Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, twice, 2003 to 2004, 2007 to 2008. His military occupational specialty was 153 Delta Bravo Black Hawk pilot, aviation safety officer, and 91 Bravo 2 Foxtrot flight medic. May I have a hoo-ah for Jeff, please? Also, Chuck and Inez's son, Stephen Heinemann, United States Army veteran. Raise your hand, please. Stephen had active duty July 1990 to March 1998. MOS 11 Bravo 2 Victor Infantryman. Active duty stations included 2nd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, Army Special Operations Command, Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, 1st Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division, Fort Lewis McChord, Washington, 1st Battalion, 17th Infantry Regiment, 6th Infantry Division, Fort Wainwright, Alaska. While assigned with the 1st of the 17th, Stephen deployed to Cuba for 6 months, working migrant camps as part of Operation Sea Signal, which was a Department of Defense operation in response to an influx of Cuban and Haitian migrants attempting to gain asylum in the United States during the years 1992 through 1996. Stephen also served with the Washington Army National Guard from 98 to 2001 as a 91 Bravo combat medic, and also with the 181st Brigade Support Battalion, 81st Brigade Combat Team, Seattle, Washington. May I have a hooah for Stephen? Also, I want to recognize Chuck's brother, Dr. Mark Heineman, orthodontist, U.S. Coast Guard veteran. Following graduation from the University of Washington, Mark was assigned to the Presidio of San Francisco for his residency at Letterman Army Medical Center. And upon completion of residency, Mark was assigned to Fort Washakie, Wyoming, where he was charged with a medical facility on the Wind River Indian Reservation. Can I have a Navy hooyah for Mark? And also, as we just introduced, Mark Heineman, Chuck and Inez's son. Mark served in the United States Marine Corps for 10 years during the period 1987 through 97. His duty stations included Marine 3rd Corps Security Force, Kings Bay Naval Base in Georgia, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, Camp Lejeune, Operation Just Cause, Panama, the Scout Sniper Platoon Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Fleet Anti-Terrorist Security Team Company, Norfolk, Virginia, 1st Platoon, Souda Bay, Crate Contingency Security, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, attached to the United States Coast Guard, picking up Haitians in the Caribbean Ocean, 3rd Platoon, Port-au-Prince, Haiti, reinforced U.S. Embassy after the coup of Aristide, Marine Corps Security Forces Battalion, Norfolk, Virginia, Headquarters Platoon Ammunition Technician, 2nd Marine Division, Camp Lejeune, Headquarters Platoon Company Clerk, discharged in 1997, United States Marine Corps. Can I have a hoorah for Mark? Hoorah! Thank you. Thank you all for your service. This morning, we're privileged to have a birthday celebrant who, as you've seen, had virtually the entire family clan come in from all over the country. And they've joined us on this special day. Chuck Heineman, again, raise your hand back there, sir. Folks, again, Chuck is celebrating his 82nd birthday, which actually was yesterday on January 2nd. Chuck, you are one fortunate man to have all these loved ones come in for your celebration. You know, over the past several years, Chuck and Inez have been a solid fixture at our Red Friday Assembly, seldom missing a meeting and volunteering for numerous Red projects. Believe me, we're most grateful for their dedication and their promotion of Red Friday. But considering that this is a special occasion for Chuck, I want to share with you a story that's seldom been told, albeit a very condensed story. It's a story that's compelling, inspiring, and it's indicative of the determination this soldier demonstrated in recovering from a tragedy that, unfortunately, so many of our wounded warriors have never and may never recover from. I want to highlight some of the experiences of U.S. Army Vietnam combat veteran Charles Heineman, our birthday celebrant. Back in 1967, at the age of 24, a young whippersnapper by the name of Charles Milton Heineman boarded a bus at the Military Induction Center in Seattle, Washington, headed off to Fort Lewis, and for 8 weeks attended Army basic combat training. At this point in his life, Chuck had already completed 2.5 years of college, followed by a stint with the Peace Corps in Puerto Rico. Chuck surpassed all the rigors of basic training and, upon completion, was ordered to Fort Polk, Louisiana to attend 8 weeks of advanced infantry training. And upon graduating AIT, Chuck was ordered to Fort Benning, Georgia, where for 8 weeks he attended the first class of the newly designed program for the Basic Non-Commissioned Officer Candidate School. Upon completion of BNOC, and as a newly promoted Sergeant E5, Chuck was ordered back to Fort Polk for 8 weeks and there served as an Army drill sergeant. Chuck was then given a 2-week leave of absence and headed home to visit with family. Following leave, he reported to the San Francisco Bay Area, where he boarded a plane from Travis Air Force Base headed to Vietnam. Now, Chuck recalled that as the troops were flying west over the Pacific, the popular song released by Fifth Dimension, Up, Up and Away, was played on the intercom. On March 12, 1967, as they were flying over the jungles of Vietnam, headed to Ton Son Nhat International Airport in Saigon, Chuck could see puffs of smoke rising from the jungle. They would soon find out what those puffs of smoke were all about. For the next 2 weeks, the Cherries went through preliminary training on how to survive the jungle. They learned how to maneuver through the jungle and through banana plantations, over rice paddies, and through water crossings. Following jungle survival training, Chuck was assigned to the 9th Infantry Division and flew to his base camp at Dong Tam, located in the Mekong Delta region of South Vietnam. When he got off the plane, an Alpha Company clerk assigned Chuck as the 3rd Platoon Squad Leader for the 3rd Battalion, 47th Infantry Regiment. The 3rd of the 47th was assigned to alternate every 3 months with the 2nd Battalion, 47th Marine Riverine Force. That force was responsible for patrolling the Mekong Delta. The MRF was a joint Army-Navy force that comprised a substantial part of the Brown Water Navy in Vietnam. The unit would patrol 5 to 20 clicks away from base camp, looking for any unusual activity or people in the area. For you civilians, a click is a term used by all NATO military forces to denote 1 kilometer or 1,000 meters or 0.6 of a mile. All military topographical maps used by NATO forces use the metric system. So, some of the patrols that Chuck participated in would last up to 2 weeks. On a few occasions, the unit performed drug patrols on a road from the Mekong River to Cambodia. They also performed sentry duty along the fence line of camp. On one occasion, following a long, dirty 2-week patrol, Chuck's unit was being flown back to base in helicopters. The troops were looking forward to a good shower, shave, a little rest. Once they arrived at base, they were told to go stow their gear, clean the mud off their boots, put on clean jungle fatigues, fall out to the parade ground. The last thing they wanted to do that afternoon was stand at attention for review or listen to someone standing there in starched fatigues, carrying an ivory-handled chrome .38 and knife on his hip. They wondered what General Westmoreland was going to do with that .38. The revolvers were virtually useless sidearms in Vietnam's warfare. Not long after Chuck had arrived in country, his platoon sergeant was injured and was sent home. Chuck was then assigned the position of platoon sergeant. When Chuck's platoon was on their 3-month duty assignment with the Mobile Riverine Force, they were assigned to a Navy troop ship anchored in the Mekong River. Also attached to the platoon were assault boats, armored Higgins boats, commonly referred to as amphibious landing craft, and floating flamethrowers. The flamethrower boat, often referred to as a Zippo boat, were modified landing craft with mounted flamethrowers. They were used for assault protection if the unit were to get trapped or ambushed. Chuck's unit would ride the Higgins up the river into the estuaries and the tributaries. His team would be dropped off, and they would patrol the designated area either along the shore or in the jungle. The Riverine Force would then pick up his team at a pre-designated location. Before Chuck's team was authorized to return to the ship, they were hosed off with a fire hose to get the mud off them, and they had to take off their boots and wear flip-flops to prevent foot fungus. There was a program called Chi-Hoi, translated as Open Arms. This was a program that placed North Vietnamese defectors with American troops. Chuck's assignee was a Dr. Ba. The doctor had defected from North Vietnamese hospital because the hospital could not get any medical supplies. Dr. Ba protected Chuck on numerous occasions, to include one instance when Chuck's patrol was crossing a rice paddy, came across some rolled up bamboo mats. Dr. Ba stopped Chuck from picking up the mat because there was a grenade booby trap wrapped inside. Chuck was in country about 3 months when he was on a blocking force mission for the 2nd Battalion, 43rd Infantry Regiment. The 2nd of the 43rd was pushing a division of North Vietnamese towards Chuck's unit. A fellow soldier, John, was about 50 yards ahead of Chuck, carrying an M79 grenade launcher and a rucksack full of ammunition when he got hit by small arms fire. John fell into a canal, and by the time Chuck and 3 other soldiers got to John, his M79 and the rucksack were gone, vanished, grabbed up by the North Vietnamese. Chuck and his team members were able to get John onto a poncho liner, each soldier taking a corner to get John back to safety of their unit. Chuck was on the left back corner of the poncho, and as they were heading back for cover, Chuck turned back to see exactly what their location was. A shell from John's stolen M79 exploded near Chuck. It knocked Chuck down, collapsing his lung. Another soldier came out and took Chuck's corner of the poncho. Chuck was able to get up, and all team members made it back to the command center. By the time Chuck arrived at the command center, he was in very, very bad shape. A dust-off helicopter was called in for Chuck and John, but the Viet Cong poured heavy small arms fire on the chopper, preventing the pilot from landing. Chuck and the team had to wait until morning. Typically, when there was a skirmish with the NVA during the day, the NVA would sneak away during the night. Chuck's team remained in place for the night, and the following morning, the command post called in another dust-off. While waiting for the chopper, an Army colonel's helicopter attempted to land nearby. The colonel wanted to see how the troops were doing. Unfortunately, the pilot misjudged the landing, flipped the chopper over, and it fell into a rice paddy upside down. Needless to say, the colonel walked back to camp. Chuck and John were ultimately medevaced to a hospital ship on the Mekong River. Chuck stayed in sick bay for 2 weeks. Then he was released back to his unit, placed on light duty. Chuck received his first Purple Heart Medal as a result of that injury. Shortly after his release from the hospital, Chuck was back with his unit. His first sergeant came to him, handed him a .45 pistol and a web belt, and he assigned Chuck to take a soldier to a stockade near Saigon. When Chuck returned to camp, he was ready for duty again. On September 11, 1967, Chuck had been in Vietnam for 7 months. His team was on their second day of patrol. They were following a small group of Viet Cong along the bank of a tributary. Chuck came upon some bamboo that had been sheared off close to the ground. In that brief moment, Chuck stepped on that bamboo. It had a landmine underneath that exploded. Chuck was transported by chopper to the Saigon hospital. The hospital expedited him directly to a MASH unit in Ben Hoi for a traumatic head injury. It was there that Chuck had surgeries on his brain, legs, and torso. When he was finally stable, Chuck was transported to Japan, where he underwent lengthy physical therapy. Chuck's father worked at Boeing Company, and his father's boss came into the office, handed him a ticket, and he said, "Isn't there someplace you need to be?" The next day, Chuck's dad was on a flight to Japan. When Chuck started to regain consciousness, he saw his dad standing at the foot of his bed. His father was the one who told Chuck he had lost his leg. Chuck does not recall how long he was hospitalized in Japan, but it was imperative that he be stable enough to take the long medical flight back to Travis Air Force Base, stateside. Sometime in the night, he was flown to Madigan Army Medical Center in Fort Lewis. Total, Chuck spent 2 years in the hospital recovering from his injuries. For injuries sustained, Chuck was awarded his second Purple Heart Medal. Chuck recalled being in a ward with about 25 men. One night, they decided they wanted pizza and beer. One guy happened to have a Volkswagen Bug, so he volunteered to go to a little store on base for the goods. The guy was in a full body cast. Chuck has no clue how the guy managed, but that night they put their beds in a covered wagon circle and enjoyed a slice of pizza and cold beer. That's what you call a grunt gorge. Set up a perimeter of defense, drown yourself in the splendor of pizza and beer. Chuck served our nation on active duty for 19 months, from 1967 to 69. He is the recipient of the Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, meaning twice awarded, National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Non-Commissioned Officer Professional Development Ribbon, the Army Service Ribbon, the Army Overseas Service Ribbon, and the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal. He is proud of the fact that during his tour of duty in Vietnam, he never lost anyone that he was responsible for. All of his men made it home. As a result of his extensive injuries, Chuck was medically retired and earned a VA disability compensation. So very little for someone who sacrificed so very much while in service to our country. You know, every day when Chuck puts on that prosthetic leg, he's reminded of his time in Vietnam. But his Vietnam experience has not destroyed, deterred, or defeated him, nor has it defined who he is. It has only strengthened him. Chuck states adamantly that he has had a good life. He and Inez have been married 47 years. They have 3 wonderful children, 14 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. And Chuck's Vietnam experience didn't deter any of his children from entering military service. As we've noted, son Mark served in the Marines during Desert Storm. Son Stephen served as an Army Airborne Ranger. Chuck has a grandson who served in the U.S. Army in the Afghanistan War. What a fabulous lineage of American patriots. Following his military service, Chuck worked 30 years for Boeing. And to top it off, he has taken 2 excursions to Europe, skied with his sons, golfed for many years, and even snorkeled in Hawaii. Next on his to-do list is making a 60-second delayed skydiving free fall jump. Chuck, I know someone who can tutor you on preparing for that experience. Chuck, I can't express how honored our Red Friday group is to have you on board. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your personal sacrifice. Thank you for your continued support of the armed forces. Thank you for your support of this Red Friday program. May I have a hoo-ah for Chuck Heineman? Chuck, I believe that we have a couple of guests here that also want to have the opportunity to address you this morning. Linda and Paul, will you please come forward? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Evanson and Linda Novotny, representing Quilts of Valor.
Well, I know that some of you know about Quilts of Valor, but I want to tell you a little bit about Quilts of Valor. It's a national organization, nonprofit. It was started in 2003. It was started in 2003 by a lady in Iowa, Catherine Roberts. Her son had been deployed to Iraq, and in a dream, she saw a young soldier who had been wounded in combat sitting on his bed, somewhat depressed. Later, she saw that same soldier with a quilt wrapped around him and realized that quilts bring a sense of comfort and a sense of healing. So that she got some of her friends together who were quilters, and they started making quilts, called it Quilts for Soldiers. Originally, it was designed for those who had been wounded in combat. In fact, the first quilt was awarded at R.E.D. Hospital. But as time went on, they realized that there's more to it than that. You know, there's Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force, Marines, as well as our. Anyone who enters the military is touched by war. By the very nature of being in the military, you're touched by war. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter where you're posted. Quilts of Valor says that valor is giving up your rights to freedom for a term of service in order to ensure the safety and the protection of our nation and population. So they changed the name to Quilts of Valor Foundation, and they said the mission of Quilts of Valor Foundation is to cover service members and veterans touched by war with comforting and healing Quilts of Valor. From that small group of people, it now measures about 11,000 people nationwide who are involved in Quilts of Valor. Dedicate their time and energy and creativity to hand making all these quilts. In 2024, 35,333 quilts were made and awarded. Since 2003, 408,727 quilts have been made and awarded to veterans or active service members. President Truman, in 1945, said, "Our debt to the heroic men and valiant women in the service of our country can never be paid. They have earned our undying gratitude. America will never forget their sacrifices." When he was dedicating the Vietnam War Memorial, then Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger said, "When your country called, you came. When your country honor, you remain silent. Your country now recognizes your sacrifice. Welcome home." A quilt is not a blanket. A blanket is a single piece of fabric, but a quilt comes in 3 layers. The top piece is many little pieces put together to form one unit, much like what happens when we go into the military. People from all walks of life, from all different parts of the country, but we form to become one unit. The middle piece, or the batting, is what gives warmth to the quilt. And the back is what gives strength and unity to the quilt. A quilt of valor is not a gift. It can't be bought, be sold. It's an expression of gratitude for service to our country. And I'd like to have Inez and Amber come up with me. Next, we have Mark Heineman to come up. As you know, Mark served in the United States Marine Corps from 1987 to 1997. Stephen Heidemann, would you please come up? As you know, Stephen served in the United States Army and then from 1990 to 2001. And Jeff Crandall. Jeff retired from the Army, served 1990 to 2011. On behalf of Quilts of Valor, we would like to thank these individuals for their service to our country.
Paul? Get Linda, come up, please. The Quilts of Valor program, as explained by Paul, has been an immense healing ceremony for veterans all across this country. These guys alone have produced countless numbers. As a matter of fact, correct me if I'm wrong, you were not only producing these here, but in Minnesota before you came here, you produced probably 400 quilts there. Is that correct?
Our group did.
Their group. We have a very coveted Red Friday lapel pin that we would like to present to you. This is an absolute minimal token of our appreciation for what you do, but I hope that you will wear this proudly. May I?
You bet.
And I'm going to let you put on this one. Thank you. And I will let you put on this last one, the butterfly clip. Thank you. Appreciate it very much, though.
Thank you, sir.
Can I have a resounding hoo-ah for all of these folks that just received these quotes? Thank you, thank you. To our guests and to the Heinemann family, thank you very much so for joining us today. We appreciate you guys coming in from all over the country. To our local guests, we're certainly hoping that you'll be able to make the return. Our door will always be open to you. And as a final reminder, let's not forget to keep our deployed warriors in our thoughts and in our prayers, and continue to demonstrate our support for these fine men and women. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you.